Okay, welcome everybody to Wine SONA 2023 with Christian Eedes. My name is David Clarke from Animo Wine Company. We're a merchant, distributor and an importer and a little bit of an exporter, but we're concentrating on domestic wine this evening. This is our third conversation for Wine SONA. So for those who are not familiar with what SONA is, it's the State of the Nation address. Usually given by the President of the nation about the state of the nation. But we thought a few years ago, it was about 2 weeks before, it was 2 months before the COVID pandemic hit in 2020. I thought, let's have a look at the state of the nation of South Africa and wine. South African wine has been on an immensely vicious trajectory over the last probably 20 years, and even more so in the last 10, and probably even more so in the last 5. It's been a bit of an aggressive shift in the industry. Would you agree with that, Christian?
Absolutely. It's just been a real privilege to be involved. I have been commentating on South African wine since 2000. I guess that's why you approached me to I'll present an annual take on what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, no, I just thought so much happens in South African wine every 12 months since I've been here. I arrived in South Africa in January 2013, so it's been 10 years that I've been here, and every year so much has happened that it's hard to sort of encapsulate someone who I speak to every 4 or 5 years. Oh, what's happening in South Africa? There's just too much to talk about. So I thought putting together an annual conversation with who I think at least is the preeminent wine critic and wine journalist in South Africa, or on South African wine globally, being Mr. Eedes on my left here, would be a good idea just to plant a flag and record year by year what happened. Because for me, the first time I went to the Swartland Revolution versus the 5th time I went to the Swartland Revolution, so much happened in that sort of convening sort of 5 or 6 years. I would have liked a record of each year's event, because after a while they sort of, obviously you're drinking a fair bit, so memory isn't always the best. But they start melding into, which year was old mate from Georgia? Which year was Taras? And it gets confused. So part of what we wanted to do was to really plant a flag on the 12 months that has been, and maybe look forward to the 12 months that is coming. Before we start in earnest, I've got a few thank yous here. First of all, thank you to Matt Manning and to Caroline at Culture Wine Bar for hosting tonight. If you've never been here before, it's the place to drink wine. It has got one of the most outstanding wine by the glass programs in the country. Really excellent venue up here in the wine library, which Animo is a member. If you're not a member up here and you do wine functions or you like wine, please consider it. Rose Digital, Katie and Stuart, who are putting all of the online technical stuff I've got no clue about. Thank you guys, you're doing an amazing job for what we do here. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, thank you for coming along and listening to us waffle on about South African wine for an hour or so. So I think we should start getting into it, I think. Christian Eedes from winemag.co.za. Is it winemag.co.za or just winemag? I get confused.
So we're quite insistent about always using the suffix of .co.za, because we're very proudly digital and we believe that digital is the way forward. So it's very much winemag.co.za. Of course, it was a magazine, a hard copy magazine for a very long time. It was founded by my late dad in 1993 and went out of print in 2011, and then we relaunched it as a digital-only title in 2014.
And no nepotism involved, being founded by your old man, and somehow you found yourself as editor, or?
Look, I think I'd rather be a nepo kid than not.
Take it if he's given it to you, for sure. No, but in all seriousness, there's a reason why I asked you, and it's not because just to pick on you, because in my mind, you are one of probably the 3 greatest current living people to talk about South African wine in context of what has come before, what is happening now, and what is possible in the future. I mean, you've been in the wine industry, in the South African wine industry, immersed in it, as you say. I mean, your old man used to run Wine Magazine. I mean, I think you've got the runs on the board, as they say, and so it is incumbent on me to really push you tonight. So, you know, cards on the table. I'm going to ask you maybe a few uncomfortable questions, but it wouldn't be a State of the Nation question if I didn't ask you uncomfortable questions. So, first, very comfortable question. Broad speaking, what is the state of the nation's wine in South Africa? Where are we at? Are we happy? Are we sad? Are we moving forward? Are we moving forward quicker, slower? Is there any issues? What, broad speaking, and then we can nail down on some.
Are we
points.
happy or are we sad? I think the reality is, as much as top-end wine is looking fantastically exciting, the industry as a whole is in a very, very dire situation. We have lost about 10,000 hectares in the last 10 years, and as a whole, currently we have about 90,000 hectares in the ground, and all predictions are that we're going to lose a further 8,000 hectares in the next 7 years. And I did a rough calculation in prep for tonight. That means 3 hectares a day, every day for the next 7 years, are coming out of the ground. So,
just to be devil's advocate here, would it not be the worst vineyards coming out of the ground, or is that not true?
no, not at all. You know, there's the whole myriad of factors, and a lot of good vineyards being lost. So old vines have become a huge talking point, and in many cases are a great asset, but they tend to be low bearing, and so no matter how good the fruit is that's coming off them, they're not economical by virtue of being low bearing, so those are coming out. In your more, you know, Stellenbosch, Durbanville, areas where population growth is high, vineyards under pressure in terms of relative to housing. So you'll see really good vineyards being grabbed up for housing developments to go in. So you know it really is pretty bleak out there.
As part of your research on the grubbing up of vineyards, did you get a picture of how much, what percentage of vineyards being lost is due to urban sprawl or unsustainable sort of business practices? I mean, the vineyards aren't making enough money, or drought.
Yeah, so I think I was about to mention drought. I think, you know, climate change and the pressure for water generally. So as urban settlement increases, you know, water gets diverted away from agriculture towards, you know, sanitation, etc. So all these factors combine, and
but do you know what sort of?
no, I don't.
Okay,
Straight
okay.
answer. But I mean, the thing is, you know, Stellenbosch is under pressure from urbanization. The West Coast, you know, it's drought and irrigation.
Okay.
Or lack of.
Yeah. So that's vineyard. What about what's in the bottle? Are we winning? Are we losing?
So again, you know, everybody in the room tonight and who's watching online, you know, the top end, I think, it remains incredibly exciting. The quality improvements are ever upwards, and it's really, really gratifying to be involved in the industry at the top end. But we need to remind ourselves constantly that the top end is a minute sliver of what's actually going on in the industry. 80% of what gets produced sells for less than 50 rand a bottle.
Retail or?
Retail.
Retail. That's an alarming statistic, because what, 50 rand a bottle is not a lot per litre.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
What's it, 75 rand a litre?
you can look at it. You can look at it to try and put a positive spin on it. You're coming off such a low base. The only way is up. if we could, there is an emerging market, a middle class market in South Africa, despite all the economic indicators. I mean, people are slowly but surely getting richer, and the onus on the industry is to get them to trade up. How we do that, greater minds than me have so far failed to work that out.
You're painting a pretty gloomy picture. I mean, I like drinking South African wine. There's some really great wine out there.
No,
we're drinking some right now. It's delicious.
So as I said, the picture, structurally the picture is gloomy. There's no way around it. What's fascinating is that the top end remains so successful. As I say, this very thin sliver at the very top.
When you're talking about top end, give some sort of some quantifiable.
Sure. So I would say, this is not scientific.
Anything above 50 rand a bottle,
or pretty much, but certainly above 150 rand a bottle. So we always, when Molyneux out of the Swartlands, Allied, who works across multiple regions, Saadi out of the Swartlands, Kanonkop out of Stellenbosch, when those annual releases come around, they create huge excitement, as they should. But it really isn't representative of the industry as an entirety. And then, above 150 rand a bottle. Those wines are comfortably selling for 500, 600, 700 rand a bottle, again, as they should.
Yeah, well, maybe it's the changing state of South African wine into fitting more into the world economic realities that's just the future of South African wine. I mean, maybe making bulk wine in a place that doesn't have a lot of rain doesn't make a lot of sense.
Indeed, and I mean, in very simple terms, grapes are an agricultural commodity, and if you can plant nuts or berries or citrus on that same patch of land and get more per ton, then that's what you're going to do as a farmer. And that's precisely what's happened over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Do me a favour, you're in a gloomy mood. Have a little more sugar.
Thank you, I will.
Yeah. I'm surprised I had to invite you to do it. Okay, that's the gloomy picture on the big scale. On the big scale, what is SA doing well? What are we winning with?
Why?
Yes.
So we're blessed by this young, progressive, adventurous, brave cohort of men and women who are utterly committed to making really world-class wines. They're well-traveled, they're well-read, they drink well, in the sense that they actually know what really good wine tastes like, and so therefore are well-versed and are able to get the best out of their terroirs. And it's not just my opinion. I mean, it's well documented. The leading international critics are giving our top wines, fabulous reviews, and so that is.
I did get a few questions on your scoring, so we're going to get to that later.
Great, can't wait.
Okay, so exciting new producers. Is part of the asset of South African wine not a combination of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I just want to, again, I'm going to be prodding and poking you, a combination of, stalwart producers, doing the same thing virtually or trying to improve doing the same thing for decades, combined with this sort of flush of youth, challenging the status quo, and a combination of those things. I mean, you mentioned Kanonkop. It's not exactly a young, upstart producer.
No, sure. And mini history lesson. There's sort of, to my mind, two crucial eras or historical tipping points. One being the early 70s, when the wine of origin legislation got promulgated, And what is the wine of origin legislation? For those of you who don't know, it was an attempt to formally map out our appellations. In Europe,
I think there was a little bit of desire for control as well at the same time, but you take the good with the bad.
yeah. Well, the thing is, the KWV ruled with an iron fist for most of the previous century, and circa the 1970s, there were independent landowners, Kanonkop being a prime example, that decided they wanted to go their own way. And out of the wine of origin legislation, and these independent landowners sprang the wine route system, sprang the idea that bottling under your own label was a good thing rather than selling all your grapes to the corporates. So as I say, that was a crucial tipping point.
If you want to hear more about that, we have a podcast on xanimo.coza with Johan Malan from Simmonsburg, who was one of the that producer. His father was one of the instigators of that Stellenbosch winery. It's a fascinating listen, actually, to be honest. If you're interested in the origins of fine wine in South Africa, that really, I agree with you. It really started there, for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
And then, despite that very positive time in the industry, of course, our politics were far from ideal, and the pushback against apartheid, the global pushback against apartheid, really started to kick in more and more, and South Africa became more and more isolated, and our wine industry certainly suffered. Sanity prevailed. Nelson Mandela walked free in 1990. First legitimate elections in '94, and that was the catalyst for the next really positive change, in that we were no longer the world pariah. We were welcomed back into the international market. Our winemakers could travel again, and so began the process of reinvention, which continues to this day. And I think the only thing that's really surprising is that the quality gains are ever upwards. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any plateauing out. South African fine wine, as opposed to commodity wine, seems to just get better and better, year in and year out, which makes my job very cool.
Yeah, you've got a tough ask, haven't you? Well, that's interesting because I see it slightly differently, but no one's here to hear what I think, but we can discuss that another time. So I think we're in almost the third or fourth wave right now, and I think that the opening up of the borders actually was bad for South Africa in the long term, because South Africa wasn't ready for it, and there was a lot of pretty shitty wine flooding international markets when the sanctions stopped. And to this day, South Africa is still fighting that reputation that they were tarnished with at that point, and quite rightly so. I mean, a lot of those wines from the early '90s were pretty shit.
I don't think you're wrong at all. I think, post-isolation, the industry rushed to market with some subpar wines, no doubt about it. But it was the start of a process, and those subpar wines, the markets flushed them out. Chocolate Pinotage being a really classic case in point. We thought, as an industry, we thought we were terribly smart in taking this. And for a while, Chocolate Pinotage was quite successful. And for those who don't know, it basically was taking...
Please don't explain it. Please not.
No,
we're looking for state of the nation, not like what went wrong later before.
No, right.
Moving right along, please.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right.
No. Well, jokes aside, other things that happened was that you had international supermarket buyers.
Drink small Shannon.
This is a very sweeping statement, or not a very detailed take on what happened, but. For instance, we had this great resource of Cinsault, but which is not the world's most loved grape. And the supermarkets was convinced us to grab up the Cinso and give the world more Merlot. And that was a bloody disaster. So we've subsequently learned that Merlot generally doesn't do very well in South Africa, and generally Cinso does. And that's taken 20 or 30 years to realize.
No, I mean, the Cinso revolution, renaissance?
I think Renaissance.
Renaissance? No. Has been one of the really gratifying things from my point of view, because I didn't know that before I came here that Cinso was such a dominant, important variety historically and by plantings. And so I did I tried to do an exhaustive Cinso tasting in the winter of 2013, 6 months after I arrived, and I was put in charge of, well, not in charge, I was second in charge of SASA, the Sommeliers Association, and we did an exhaustive, all the labelled single varietal Cinsos we could find. It was 44, and 7 of the wines, no, 7 or 6, maybe 6 of the wines were from Lanzerac. Not Lanzerac, Landskroon, just down the road, down the hill from the Tal Monument. 10 years later, that number is not anywhere close. That's a massive amount, and there's still a shitload of Cinso in the ground that is still bleeding in and disappearing into. So it is only the tip of the iceberg for Cinso in this country, and it's miraculous. And part of my SASA tenure was to host the ASI top sommeliers of the world, and they came, and we were each of the SASA board members were put in charge of putting sort of 2 or 3 wines together to present. And so I chose Cinso, and they were blown away that they didn't realise it was happening. They're saying Cinso is going to be the Malbec of, like the Malbec, Argentinian Malbec of South Africa, and it remains still a really exciting category. I know you're not huge on it. What's the highest score you've given a South African Cinso offhand? Like 82, 83?
No, so I think I would, off the top of my head, I think probably 94 for Van Lockenberg. But I think Cinso maxes out at about 94 because inherently it's not the world's most complex grape. But why I think it has succeeded is that it's on trend in terms of making light red. It's not massively tannic, it's fruit forward. Our best producers all work with it and tend to go for an early pick, which again is what the world's cool wine bowlers like Culture are looking for. And so it's the right grape at the right time. Can you make a 100-point Cinso? I doubt it.
Really?
Really,
Right,
I
okay.
doubt 100-point Cinso.
Well, what about 100-point anything? Okay, no. Well, we'll get there. Okay, in an effort to give this thing some structure rather than just float around about what we're talking about, I gave a listen to our 2012 wine SONA conversation from last year, obviously.
2022.
2020. What did I say?
2012.
Oh, I apologise. It was 2022. I should stop drinking delicious Senna. And I asked you what was happening, what was the state of the nation for different cultivars at that point. So I asked you about Chenin and what's happening in Chardonnay. To avoid repetition, I thought I might change it up this year and ask you more about districts, regions, wards, areas, essentially. Are you ready for that?
Sure.
I've got, I don't know, my eyes are getting, I've got like 8 or 9, probably. First of all, the most prestigious, maybe. I'm interested to see if you think that's been taken away from Stellenbosch. Because, I mean, domestically maybe yes, but maybe internationally no.
No, I think Stellenbosch, despite the Swartland Revolution, despite all the critical attention that the Swartland has gained in the last 10 or 15 years, I think Stellenbosch remains our premier growing region, partly for historical reasons, partly because it is just so well suited to growing fine wine. Its proximity to the ocean, its various altitudes and aspects, it just lends itself to It's a really good wine, and consequently it attracts investment, which is key in an under-resourced, under-financed industry. Stellenbosch, there's still some very serious concerns where without any shortage of money.
And stylistically, is it still appropriate? I mean, the classic or the of Stellenbosch being heavy Cabernet and big and grand and lots of big gates and helicopter pads and.
So stylistically,
is it fine wine or is it just expensive wine? Or both.
It probably. I mean, the one variety that doesn't work in Stellenbosch is Pinot, and then of course you've got, in global terms, you've got Bordeaux and Burgundy as reference points, and for decades, we were talking about Kanonkop in the 70s. There's a sort of 50-year track record of Stellenbosch making really good Cabernet and Cabernet-based wines, and I think that's going to, as long as Cabernet fetches a premium in global terms, Stellenbosch will make Cabernet, and Stellenbosch has a track record of making very good Cabernet. Whether it has to be 15% or 13.5% is a moot point. I think we went through a phase where we were making really, really big Cabernets. Robert Parker was at the height of his powers, and the whole world was enthralled to Robert Parker. Thankfully, I think we're stepping back from those super gigantic wines. And why do I say thankfully? Because we all signed off on them. It wasn't just Robert Parker. They don't age well because they're too ripe, and they're not much fun to drink with food because they're too ripe.
Okay, Stellenbosch gets a pass? Are we happy with it, or what?
Stellenbosch, it's not going to always just be known for serious investable Cabernet.
The rise of Syrah in Stellenbosch has to be mentioned, surely.
Absolutely.
Come on, mate.
So I mean, Stellenbosch basically, as I say, bar Pinot, does everything well. It's got old vine Chenin. It's got a whole bunch of youngsters coming through now that are enamored with Shiraz and Syrah, and are making it in a new way of style, if you will, and unlocking the potential of Stellenbosch Syrah like we haven't seen before. It makes some of the sites that are closer to the ocean make terrific Sauvignon Blanc. Some of the sites at altitude make terrific Chardonnay. There's just no ways you can ignore Stellenbosch.
Is it worrying for Stellenbosch Cabernet that almost exclusively that it is the old guard playing in that game, and the new wave is playing in different varieties, different structures? Is it? Well, apart from Craven, obviously, good plug, but Stellenbosch Cabernet is an established producer's game. Is that an issue for Stellenbosch? Do you think they need some young blood in that game?
So
for longevity?
I don't think it's worrying so much as it's a sort of fascinating dichotomy between the younger winemakers who tend to work with Chenin and Syrah, and then as you say, the old guard. And I don't want to gloss over the old guard. I mean, they're or downplay them.
There's a reason why they're still around.
Indeed, yeah. And the thing about making serious premium Cabernet is you need resources. It requires new wood, it requires a long time in cellar. Whereas new wave Syrah, you do a carbonic maceration, whack it in a concrete tank, and you can have it on the market in 9 months, which is not necessarily the case with Cabernet.
If only it was that easy, but I get your point. And white wine in Stellenbosch, Chardonnay, Chenin, Sauvignon.
So as I say,
where are we at?
Chenin, as I think is well known, is possibly my favorite grape, but also I think it's a national treasure. It can't be celebrated enough, and it grows well everywhere, including Stellenbosch. And
in South Africa.
In South Africa. But north, south, east, and west, we do really good Chenin, and and Stellenbosch is blessed with you know, a whole stack of old vine Chenin. Not to say that you can only make premium Chenin off old vines, but it is an asset, and we're starting to realize that asset, or we have made a lot of, done a lot of hard work to really understand why old vines are important and keep them in the ground, and leverage the asset in terms of making wines that can sell at a premium.
Okay. Next on the chopping block, or the examination table, is Swartland, and I've included West Coast in this sort of bracket. You can address them separately or together, but I've separated the sort of the high altitude Olifantsberg series plateau Citrusdal area from the more coastal.
So yeah, I think it's important to draw the distinction between Lutzville through to Olifants River, where typically by virtue of the proximity to the Atlantic Ocean, the growers plant large-scale plantings of Sauvignon Blanc, you know, as a commercial.
Sorry, I didn't realise we were going to talk about Swartland Sauvignon Blanc. I wouldn't have invited you.
No. So what I'm saying, so Lutzville and north is miles away. I mean, literally miles away from the Swartland. I mean, you could also. So basically, you've got these vineyards running along the coast, and as I say, by virtue of being close to it starts with Darling. You've got the Darling Hills that are basically on the ocean, and then inside of the hills, you're in semi-desert, which is
essentially it's a wheat growing area with some vines.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then
Where they can't grow wheat, they grow vines.
And
essentially.
as soon as you're in wheat growing country, it's hot and dry, and you're too far away from the ocean so you've got to plant heat-resistant varieties, and historically Chenin and Syrah have done very well, but as climate change takes its toll, increasingly there's a line of argument that not even Syrah is going to be suitable. But just to go back to the distinction between Olifants River and the Swartland is an important distinction. I don't.
Well, let's address the Swartland